Okay, hi everyone. I thought I would make a video today talking about perceptions and ideas of firearm effectiveness in the early modern world. So by that I'm talking about basically Europe and Eurasia from about let's say 1450 to around 1700. There's a lot of, I think, cliches about the adoption and use of firearms in this period that are made with hindsight, but also kind of obscure a lot of the profound impact the firearms had on the battlefields back then. So, you'll see a lot of comments or people that, even historians sometimes make about, guns weren't really that effective. It was mostly just for shock, or, it was, cannons, artillery was not truly that effective. Someone on my channel, said, in war games, pike and shot air artillery shouldn't be that accurate anyway because they were just firing at fortifications. So I'm just giving my view based on battles that I've studied or read about from sources, and a lot of it's going to be Ottoman, but of course I deal with the Europeans that fought with the Ottomans, and so I have, I think, a decent idea of different engagements and that sort of thing where firearms were used quite effectively. So first of all, I think the introduction of small arms, infantry small arms, was not just from mass volley fire alone, although of course because just of the nature of musketry, they have to be massed to have an impact. But still, I would say you're dealing probably with engagement distances that are about the same as most modern military engagements. So of course the rule of thumb is most infantry engagements in our age of mechanized maneuver warfare take place at around 100 yards. And I would say that that was probably true in the early modern period as well. And so there is reason to believe that firearms were effective just based on the fact that the accuracy issue, I think, and this is my argument, is something that is created out of modern hindsight about rifling and precision, targeting. And we can think of in more recent history, sometimes that early 20th century, 19th, early 20th century obsession with precise marksmanship has kind of been what was, challenged. There were projects, the adoption of, I think assault rifles at all, kind of speaks to that, the precision marksmanship paradigm is not as a necessity as we might think. There's a video on YouTube of someone doing, some experimental archaeology target shooting of a musket, a matchlock musket. I think it's from the Jamestown historical site, if I remember correctly. They're shooting, I think, at about 50 to 75 yards, so about, the engagement distance the colonists at that point would have been fighting, and it was fairly accurate in terms of getting a center mass hit, and I think he was even the historian interpreter was shooting at a plate armor of some kind as well, and was able to penetrate. So I think the idea that, well, muskets were, inaccurate compared to today. Well, in the early modern period, people don't really have as much frame of reference as to accuracy. This is what technology. This is the technology they have, and it works. Now, on the other hand, archery was still used quite prevalently. The Ottomans used archery a lot. The Ottoman cavalry preferred bows. Interestingly enough, there is an account I think it dates from about the mid 16th century, that says, there was an idea to give the cavalry muskets in the face of because of Habsburg mounted arquebusiers. This was not really done, mostly because the Ottoman cavalry in particular had a strong attachment to archery. And of course, in Turkish culture, even today, archery is very valued. But even so, firearms were used heavily by the Ottomans. Of course, the Janissaries, but also over time in the 16th century, there was a tremendous increase for the size of the Janissary Corps and getting musketeers in the field, and also in musket-bearing infantry, non-Janissary infantry. Basically, they are musketeers, and they are used a lot. And this is especially by the end of the 16th century, when they have a major confrontation with the Habsburgs. The Ottomans see that the Habsburgs, since their last confrontation at Sigatvar in the 1560s, the Habsburgs had undergone significant rearmament, and Habsburg infantry units by that point resembled the strong pike and shot formations that would become even more famous in the 30 Years' War. So there is an understanding in both Europe, Western Europe, and the Ottoman world at that point that firearms are extremely useful, and where a lot of attention needs to be made. This happens as well. The other major Ottoman rival, the Safavids, in the early 16th century, as I talked about this a little bit in my video on Safavid armies. So the Safavid Iranian dynasty initially is mostly made of horse archers. They're called Turkomans or Kizilbash, and fairly early on they realized that the army of Selim I, with a lot of musketeers and coordinated with artillery, field artillery, is able to defeat them at Chaldiran. The Ottomans do a similar thing in the early to the Mamluks. About a few years later, the Mamluks had not adopted as many musketeers and artillery as the Ottomans, although they did have some. So firearms are very important on the early modern battlefield. We can also think in a European context, the Battle of Fornovo, where the Spanish are able to defeat a French cavalry charge with coordinated musketry. There are other examples I could bring up, but just for the sake of brevity and argument, I think in the context of the time, firearms are extremely useful, and for the the people interacting with them, you know, pinpoint accuracy, you know, may not have been really a priority, and the tactics of the day helped to overcome that anyway, of having, you know, volley fire. So on the artillery side of things, you know, early modern artillery was not all siege guns, and it was not all unwieldy. You know, so the Ottomans had, and I'm using Ottoman examples just because that's where I've looked at either primary sources or good secondary research based on primary documents. And in the first case, the Ottomans had quite a wide range of artillery, both, you know, the heavy siege guns that are often well known, but also, you know, more medium and light pieces. My project right now, I have orders of battle for one particular Ottoman campaign that lists specifically notes that they are carrying light artillery pieces, and they're able to use them very effectively against the Safavids, who are mostly mounted on horses, although they do have you know, musketeers of their own. So I would just say, you know, this again, this idea that you know, firearms in this period were just completely, you know, inaccurate and not really actually that useful. I don't really buy it. Now, you could say, I think a more intelligent argument against firearms would be, you know, firearms alone in the early modern period would not be very useful on their own, you know, in terms of just having, you know, infantry musketeers. And I think there is a lot of merit to that. I don't agree entirely, but I think, you know, saying in the context of early modern firearms, they have to be part of a combined arms system, you know, with supporting infantry armed with hand weapons and cavalry. I think that's a more compelling point of view. And I think a lot of what undergirds this type of thinking is just general historical positivism. And what I mean by that is, you know, technology is always getting better, or, you know, there's been a, let's say, you know, technology has gotten increasingly sophisticated. So, you know, the technology of the past was not, you know, not as good, and you know, I think that leads to a lot of often leads to a lot of distortions. So, you know, we need to evaluate historical technologies in their time, and, you know, what did the people using them think about them. You know, if something is not effective, I don't think people, you know, are generally going to use it. You know, firearms were just this cumbersome, you know, not really that effective weapon. You know, I don't think soldiers would have used them, and you know, armies would not have adopted them en masse. You know, and of course, that's not to say that, you know, matchlock firearms didn't have their share of problems, but again, you know, if you are a, you know, 16th century soldier, and this weapon gives you a market advantage over, you know, an armed knight. You know, we have to think about, especially in the early 16th century, you know, the knight, the armored cavalry, had been an extremely dominant force on the battlefield. You can now, you know, be line infantryman with a musket or with an arquebus, and potentially defeat a knight. The rise of infantry that's often discussed in these about in this time period. So if it's not an effective weapon system, people I don't think would have used it that much. So that's my video about that subject. If people have any comments that are well informed and are grounded in good research, please leave them below. And I'll talk to you guys in the next video.